a good start would be a little bit of your journey to AI, given that's the primary topic of the call. And I think it'd be quite an interesting lead in, because you've obviously had quite an interesting route to AI, if I can put it that way.
So AI is just a manifestation of how you bring intelligence out of data, right? That's what AI is meant to. So obviously, when I was doing my research on RFID, the expectation is RFID is going to generate tons of data, and then no human being, right, or no simple logic could comprehend what RFID data is saying, right? So you need intelligence to be built on top of that, right? So that's kind of how my initial interest into AI started, and then this is like 98, and then when I took on a job with a a supply chain transformation company coming out of MIT, and the product I was working on is how do you optimally schedule a manufacturing line so that your cost of manufacturing is minimized, right? So I give you a simple example. You make a red car and then you want to make a white car. You have to clean the pipes, right? Otherwise you won't get pure white, right? So there's always a changeover cost involved in manufacturing different varieties and configurations of car. And in 2000, the .com is the craze. So the idea was people could configure their cars just like you would configure a Dell laptop, for example. I want a red car with a chrome wheels and this and this and this, and then you would actually produce the car that comes out. So, a typical assembly line, over a course of a year, you probably make more than 1 million cars. And then you have all varieties, right? From size, color, left to right, number of seats and so on and so forth, right? So in that context, we were looking at, okay, what's the technology that we can use to optimize the overall car production so the cost of manufacturing is minimized or the utilization of the line is maximized, so to speak. So when you have so many, kind of constraints, it's very hard to use a typical, at that time, the state of the art would be linear programming. You basically put a bunch of constraints and then you do a LP and it will give you a optimal result. But when you have 1 million cars with all these constraints, it just becomes, so we were using at the time what they call genetic algorithm to optimize the car. It's kind of imagine it's a very early version of AI, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of, if you pause in time in 2000, so shit, that's the state of the art, right? And and then as technology progresses forward, now if you look at the last 5 years, 10 years, the technology got to a point where you can do things like that, what I told you, like a breeze. It's not complicated anymore because technology evolved, algorithms evolved to a point where, making that type of algorithm optimization is a very, very simple thing these days, right? Now, things have gone from, typical linear programming type, technologies to deep learning, neural networks, deep neural networks. Now you see all the rage around ChatGPT, right? Where, if you read the news, it actually ChatGPT passed a law exam, passed a medical exam, right? Actually, it actually passed the medical exam. It actually passed the law exam, right? It was able to answer questions, right? What you would imagine a subject matter expert would struggle to answer, right? Would actually struggle to, right? So they're able to answer those questions, right? So technology has evolved to a point where AI is able to learn from the feed of data, what you call the history, and then predict the answers to the questions that you may ask, right? Now, I think technology at a point where AI is actually driving or help drive or augment the decision-making process of most companies, right? So pretty much every company in the world will use AI, 1% to 50%, right? Depending on who they are, right? So I think that's kind of where technology is, right? So now the amount of data is so enormous, and also history of data is so enormous. Now the machines, you can train them to actually say, hey, this is kind of what life would be, and the system is able to predict the results based on unknown data sets now. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating introduction, I think, Prasad. And, I think what strikes a chord there, as you say, is AI is now at a point where it's able to be embedded in business decision making with confidence, and enable that decision making to be more effective. So I think that's really powerful. And I think what you're saying, the reason you've stuck with AI is because you could see that potential from those early days. And I suppose what you've done since then is consciously link technologies together to be able to use AI in the most effective way possible. And that bit of the journey I'm fascinated by, because you use IoT, you use satellite tracking, you use other technologies, machine vision perhaps, whatever, to augment the AI outputs that you provide clients with. Can you sort of talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think that's a very good question. So now the amount of data, Steve, that's available is publicly available is enormous, right? So if you think about from the perspective of a business use case, I'll give you a simple example. I'll give a couple of examples that will basically drive home the point. So imagine, if you will, a large utility or a pipeline company out there, or defense out there, which has a enormous land, kind of that they own over a course of several, tens of thousands of square miles. So it is their land, it's their pipeline that is going through the land, right? If you have some obstruction that will come close to the pipeline integrity may be breached, right? So what people do today, they have linemen going and checking if somebody is squatting around, or somebody is doing some activity around, digging around, or some trees, coming close to that, which could actually have the roots can go and basically have structural integrity issues. Or they fly drones to basically and monitor, like a camera, monitor what's going on in these areas, right? Because all these things are real. If you have some structural breach, not only is it disruption to your business, but if you have oil spill, that actually has a huge environmental impact, right? So now what we're doing is you have satellites passing by every day, sometimes twice a day. So we are actually capturing the satellite data, right? And through AI, we're able to say from before to now, here's a new activity that's going on around the pipeline. So based on that activity, we raise alerts. Hey, these are 4 alerts that are actually happening around a pipeline in the last 24, 48 hours or 1 week. Based on that, they can actually look at the image and take action, as opposed to having to go monitor every single piece of the image. So we actually raise alert to actually help them. Hey, this is basically where the activity is going on. Please monitor that, and then they can go take action, right? Yeah. So that's one example, right? So imagine, if you will, again, from an AI perspective, you have a large water body, a dam, whatever it is, right? So these water bodies are used from the perspective of both saving water, but also used from a flood control perspective. It actually serves both purposes. Yeah. So typically, if you have a large dam, in the catchment area of a large dam, there will be few thousand small ponds, which will hold like 1,000th of the capacity of the dam. They are large. The local villages and establishments capture water, and only when that pond fills, the water will go to the big reservoir. So now with the climate change, what do you want to know? You want to know, okay, when is flood going to come? When should I operate my hydropower? You know, how much water am I going to get into this dam? So the amount of water you're going to get into the dam is a direct function of how empty or full these ponds are upstream. Rain is a factor, but if all the ponds are empty, water goes into those ponds first before it comes to the reservoir. So here, using satellite data, we're able to, using AI and satellite data, we're able to predict how full are these ponds. How much water holding capacity does these ponds have, and based on that, how much water can you expect in the reservoir from a flood control perspective? Okay, number three is, now there's a lot of interest in solar and wind and all those things as a way to reduce your carbon emissions. But as you know, solar and wind are not reliable 24 hours a day, right? If you have a cloud, the efficiency of the solar panel goes down. In the evening, it goes down. In the night, it actually quite low. Wind is very unpredictable throughout the day and night, right? So now, using data, for example, what is the climate predictions? What's the actual wind patterns? What's the predicted wind patterns? What's the cloud cover as of now? What is the forecast for rain in this area? We forecast how much power can be produced by solar and by wind turbines, and how do you balance your grid by using that with respect to how much coal powered you should generate, how much hydropower energy should generate. So you want to balance your grid across these various items so that the grid is stable while you're maximizing your green energy, right? So that's a very big problem, right? So actually, in fact, we were participating in the US government's hackathon, and we are top three, I think top two, kind of award winners after 3 rounds, right? In optimizing the power generation and balancing the grid. It's Department of Energy's hackathon that we, were the top.
So I think that was very impressive.
The data will help you in solving these problems which no human being can solve. No human being can say, how is a cloud going to travel in the next 1 hour? No human being will say, how will wind come in the next, right? You have to bring all these data sources together and optimize to basically say what the solar and wind generation is going to be minute by minute, 15 minutes, 1 hour, and how you should balance the grid by raising other power sources so they actually optimize the green energy output of the entire grid. So I think AI will have lots of benefits, right? In corporates, in utilities, in oil and gas. You can name it. You can name an area, and the AI will play a huge role in that.
I think that's absolutely fascinating, and my takeaway is very much that we're now sort of extracting data from inanimate objects, if you like, or inanimate or non-human entities. The land, the sky, the water, etc., which I think is fascinating because harnessing that is clearly a step change in what we've done before. So I think that is a really, really big point. And I think if I turn to the produce industry, I'm thinking of how does that apply to the produce industry? Because you have orchards, you have weather patterns, you have droughts, you have varieties, you have pests, and when I look at South Africa, they're constantly tweaking the crops that they create based on an assumption of market demand, but also on what last season told them was good sellers. And it strikes me that what you've described, there is a place in the produce industry for such a combination of data inputs to create a better picture of what to do next, if I can put it as loosely as that.
Absolutely, right? So, there are a number of use cases there, right? One use case that's very, interesting from a producer perspective So as you know, all these agriculture or horticulture, the fruits, is driven. The output is driven by obviously climate, but also your yield is driven by the pest. Right? If you have too much pest infestation, then you have less yield because you're not getting, and also the quality is going down. So there's quite a bit of work we have done, and not just us, industry has done, where imagine if you have a fly on your banana, right? You can take a picture of the banana with the fly, and the system will tell you what to do. All the knowledge is built in. Okay, this fly basically means this disease or this pest, right?
Yeah.
And this is how. So as you can imagine, historically, the knowledge is in the in the minds of the people, experts who are the farmers, right? Now, as generations go by, the knowledge, some knowledge is transferred, but now we're capturing knowledge into the system so that everybody has knowledge across the board, right? That's very, very important, so that you don't need to, you don't miss kind of addressing the issue right before it becomes too late, right? Number one. Number two, your yield is also driven, as I said, by climate, and that has impact on your pricing, right? If depending on number of trees that are being planted, depending on number of kind of the yield forecast of this thing, your price could go up or down, right? So I think data will play a huge role, both for suppliers, both and also the importers and the retailers, right? To say how you would actually handle your supply chain based on the yield of the of the system, and the yield is forecasted, and you can forecast the yield along the way, not just at the end of the crop season. Along the way, you can forecast saying how healthy is the crop, is it getting enough kind of rain and enough nutrition, so on and so forth, to say this is what the yield will look like, approximately what the yield will look like, right? And through data, you can say what is the expansion of oranges in South Africa over the last 12 to 36 months, right? That basically also has an impact on how much orange production may come to the market, right? And how much of that would actually have an impact on the price because you have too much fruit coming into the market, right? So we do that. We actually help the farmers and the importers, exporters, and the governments to basically forecast how much output you can expect in the next 24 months, or no, I'm sorry, next couple of months, right? And based on that, output, how do you forecast your procurement? How do you basically do all those things?
Yeah, I think that's a very important point about you're already doing that for the industry in the agricultural sector in India, I should say. There clearly, if you use technology in advance, you can make better decisions on what market, or even create a market just for a known volume that's going to be over capacity, oversupply, I should say.
Yeah.
And the second point was that I heard age of trees makes a bit of a difference. They were talking to me about the crop yield and the fact that the oranges or whatever fruit it was were not quite the same because they were coming predominantly from, let's say, younger trees. And that was not quite given the right profile of output, if you like. So I think there's a lot of factors, it's clear, in agriculture, which you really need to consider in consolidation and say, okay, given the age of trees, given the yield, given what we know the rest of the country in terms of production, what's going to happen? What do we need to do?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right, Steve. The output is driven by multiple factors, right? One, as I said, is age. One is the conditions under which the crop is being grown, right? Because if you have too much rain, too little rain, too much sunshine, too little sunshine, has impact on the crop, right? The size and the quality of the crop, right? Of the fruit. So through information, right? Through satellite, whatever, right? You can basically, you will know. So I'll give you an example. Palm trees, right? From which you actually produce palm oil. is very popular tree in Indonesia, and at some point it was very lucrative. So what people do? You start planting like tons of, right? Then suddenly your demand, kind of doesn't scale up at the same rate as your supply, and the price plummets. And you say you're making a 5-year, 7-year commitment, right? So once you plant it, you're making a 7-year commitment. You can't just change it, right? So I think it's very important to know as a producer, who you're competing with, right? How much you're competing with, right? And when you produce, and also sometimes what happens is, it is not just you have produced too much, you have harvested all at the same time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Because so you as a country may consume X tons of oranges over a 4-month period. So if you space them properly, right, you have your price stability is there, right, and you can basically get the maximum returns for it. So what happens sometimes is, when you don't harvest in a planned way, you have excess capacity coming into the market, which market can't sustain. So you have to dump them, right? Yeah. And those are the type of things that happen, which I think data will help in terms of helping the producer and the exporter plan their activities and say, okay, based on historical thing, I can only sell so much. Now I'm expecting, based on the plantation has grown 12% over the last 12 months. So I had to find additional market. I have to basically have a processing plant to create whatever value-added products that can actually save for post-season selling, right? So I think those are the type of things we're actually helping a lot of governments right now, across a lot of states across India, where we're helping them plan the production, kind of dissemination, in a more planned way.
And I think it's, one thing that struck me as you were speaking was, this is really good for the volume. If you, that's probably not the right word. It's really good at the economic level. Yeah. From a sustainability, from a consumer perspective, do you think there's a way of associating all that data at a granular level so that a consumer could say, I know, the conditions under which this orange were grown, and I know that, it had so much water. Do you see a short or medium term future where all of the data you're talking about can be distilled down to a consumable unit, if I can put it that way?
Yeah, I think, definitely more and more, I think people are interested in, sustainability, not just from the perspective of, environmental sustainability, but also people, right? Is conflict zone, through our area, right? So I think as people get more mature in consuming data, and also people I much rather support the farmer who is growing organically, or who's going, who's basically treating his people in the right way. He's not using pesticide. He's basically being efficient in the use of water and not over. So I think all those things matter, right? Because people don't mind, paying slightly more and promoting more if they feel that is actually going to help sustainability. Because I think we are seeing so many changes happening around us, right? But I think that for that, the data, that we are providing, or whoever is providing, retail is providing to the consumer, they have to trust it. Okay, this makes sense, right? And even big corporations, right? I think they have a liability on their heads on sustainability, right? So they want to know under what conditions these things were actually produced, right? Otherwise, they end up taking the liability, right? Because they're a bigger brand as opposed to a consumer who's actually buying something, right? So I think corporations do, consumers want, and I think at the same time, corporations also want that data so that they can trust that this is actually fulfilled in the right way, right? Grown and fulfilled in the right way,
So I think that's an interesting point you've made, that it's not only because we talk a lot about the consumers trusting the data, but I think what you're adding to that is that the corporations themselves, so if I'm an exporter of fruit or a grower of fruit, I need to be able to trust the data, to be able to stand behind claim and be willing to promote, I think you used the word promote the value of that produce because I trust the data. And that is additional angle to the consumer angle, I think. You're highlighting the corporation themselves have to trust the data. If they don't, it's hard for them to promote it or sell it and say, we are doing this. They don't have, it's interesting, but this won't come into the Q&A paper, but as I mentioned to you before, IKEA looked at all of their slogans on all their products. Stand behind it.
Yeah, I think it will end up being that going forward, Steve. For example, you go buy any medicine or even kind of sandwich. They tell you the calories. They tell you the trans fat. They tell you this, all those things. They tell you, right? I mean, you look back, 20 years, that type of disclosure wasn't there, right? I think for the last 20, 30 years, the disclosure came. Same thing will happen here. It's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time before that disclosure would be a requirement when somebody consumes a product, right? So we kind of take it for granted now, assuming what is a trans fat and this and this and this at the back of the label. We kind of expect it to that information to be there, right? Similarly, I think, if you fast forward, 15, 20 years from now, people expect that information to be there regarding sustainability because, everybody worries about, kind of, where we're going, right? So I think it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good way of putting it. You touched on the social side when you were mentioning a moment ago, it's not just the product, it's the social conditions, etc., because that's what trips a lot of people up, particularly when you talk ESG versus sustainability. And, it struck me that AI could be seen as villain and hero in the same breath. And what I mean by that, if I take my South Africa example, you could use AI and satellite tracking to determine how well an orchard's performing. But at the same way, you could determine how big a township is growing illegally by additional people building shacks and siphoning electricity from the grid onto. You could visualize that in a dashboard for a government or an agency or a council and say, this is what's happening in your area, for you to stop. So is there a sort of ethical or privacy angle whereby AI from a combination of technology perspective adds enormous value to economic flows, but at the same time could be used as a stick for the social side? These growers all live on these townships, let's say, as an idea.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So I think, see, AI or any technology for that matter, it is basically giving you the information to make a decision. That's really what it is giving you, right? You can always blame technology, it is basically giving you information to make a decision which you did not have before, right? For example, the example you gave regarding somebody, illegally occupying an area and, building shacks. That information you had before, but you had that information before as a passer. Somebody is passing that area, something new, somebody has, right? And nobody is willing to take an action on that, right? Whether you as a community promote that or not is up to you, right? As a community, you as a government community, you want to promote somebody occupying your park and building a shack, in that park is up to you as a community, right? What cannot be ignored, I feel, is if something is being occupied, somebody should know about it. And what's the right decision to do, to take, and how to act upon that information is up to the community. Ignorance is not bliss.
Yeah,
right?
it's very
I think so. So AI is actually giving you the information to say, hey, this is what's happening. The example I gave you, a pipeline, and somebody is basically digging around the pipeline. It's up to the pipeline company to decide what they want to do with it, right? If you basically said, well, I'm being unfair to the guy who's digging around in a pipeline bursts, and several thousand gallons of petrol drips into the land. Whose fault is it? And so I think we need to always ring fence. AI is giving you the information to make a decision. Okay? It's up to the community, it's up to the people who own that information to make the right decision, right? So we can't basically put that in the context of I'm being unfair to a person who's illegally occupied a park, right? That's actually, I don't think that's the right way to kind of measure the value. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and it leads me to what was I going to say? That God, I forgot what it was. It's an extension of yeah, I know what I was going to say. So apologies. It leads me to thinking that a picture you're painting, Prasad, is where there is far more information in the end-to-end supply chain, and we know that supply chains work with a lot of assumptions. Because frankly, people don't have the time to make decisions all the time. I'm assuming this came in at the right temperature. I'm assuming it got to the store. I'm assuming, because if you had to stop and think, well, I now know a lot more about the grower than I did before. What should I do with that information? How should I change my relationship with the grower? I know a lot more about shipping conditions. I know the carriers are slowing down and speeding up. How do I use that information? You're suddenly presenting management, or you're presenting the people you're sharing the data with more dilemmas, perhaps, can I put it that way, than they ever had before. Is that a fair thing to state?
Yeah, so I think the example you talked about is a very good one, Steve. So if you did not know, even if you knew, the oranges you're getting, is out of temperature for a certain period of time.
Yeah.
As you said, it's a multitude of parameters that will drive the shelf life of an orange. The humidity, temperature, how long it's exposed, the temperature variance it's exposed to, how many days after picking. So all these things, kind of impact your shelf life, right? So if you as a importer or retailer, you have a goal of, I want to basically make sure I don't waste fruit, but I want to make sure I basically get good quality fruit in the hands of a consumer who can consume the next 1 week. If you say that's my goal, I want to get good quality food in the hands of a consumer to consume over the next week, not over the next 2 weeks, or the next week, right? Also, don't want to waste. Then you might say, hey, I'm going to basically rush order this shipment to the stores because it's been exposed to slightly, kind of different temperature over a longer period of time, which basically means got reduced by 2 days. So instead of 14 days, now it is 12 days. I got to rush the fruit to the store so that at least consumer gets 7 to 10 days of good quality fruit, in their hands. As opposed to the shipment that came in yesterday, it still had 14, 15, 16 days shelf life. So I can wait for a couple of more days. So that's the type of decision making a retailer or an importer can make, so that their goal of getting good quality fruit in the hands of the consumer, at least for 7 to 10 days, is still valid. At the same time, they're actually minimizing the amount of loss that happens because of quality issues. Right? So that's kind of where the data and algorithms to say what is the shelf life based on all these parameters will come handy.
And again, I think that's very interesting, because it's almost changing the conversation or changing the mindset of the individual. So if I'm Derek, who you know, and I'm typically thinking, what have I got? How much have I made for X? Has it got on the boat yet? Has it arrived? Has it cleared customs? I'm very practically oriented, right? It's event based. Has it done this? Have I packed it? What you're saying is a mind shift, because I've now got data on all of those things to hand, and I'm able to lift my head from that and say, as you've just said, how do I make sure that, what do I get into my customers' hands, which is of high quality and everything and good condition and so on. You've changed the thought process that Derek, as an example, has from event-based to outcome-based, if I can pick consulting words out of the air, as it were, right? Is that not true? You're saying change the mindset from event-based, this happens, this happens, this happens, to outcome-based. How do I ensure this outcome? And I've got more data, and I can analyze more data, and I can like a chess game, predict, move things in such a way as I get to win the game, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Steve. I think having this data and having the systems built on top of this data will put that power, information, right, in a way that a business user can easily make a decision. Yeah, it makes sense. Just move that thing today.
Yeah.
It's just obvious, right? Which you could not do before, because before it'll say FIFO, it came yesterday, you move that thing first, right? So the same thing I remember doing in the RFID days. I remember doing in the meat packing, or the back room, the meat storage freezer in the back room. Same issues, right? So people want to know, right? They used to do first in, first out, right? Then we changed the conversation to first expired, first out, right? So we start predicting the expiration date of the slabs of meat you are making, right? So whatever expires first, you get it out. So you don't have to discount the meat, right? Because it's going to expire very quickly, right? So those are type of things I think will help retailers increase their profit without actually compromising the quality.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I can turn the conversation a little bit now to another topic which is very dear to my heart. When I was working very closely on blockchain, with the IBM guys, we were promoting a world where we were moving away from four walls systems, if you like, to what we called intra-company systems. And blockchain was obviously that infrastructure or potential infrastructure for intra-company systems. And obviously by association, intra-company collaboration and data exchange. We all often see AI being expressed in terms of what a business pulls together from its own operations and exposing to make better decisions. How do you see AI providing value, or how could it provide value to the intra-business ecosystem in a tangible, sustainable way, if I can put it like that?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting problem. So I'll give you an example. We're working with a couple of customers where, so if I'm a corporate entity, I have typically 1,000 customers I'm servicing. If you're a Fortune 500 company, you're servicing 1,000 companies, 1,000 customers, big customers. So ensuring whatever orders they have placed are fulfilled on quantity, on time, in the most efficient way, the cost minimized way possible, is important so that they can meet their customers' demand, right? So that's kind of, so today, as you know, still, we're in 2023, still supply chain, the promises of, kind of optimizing everything, there's a gradual and continuous improvement that is happening in that, over the course of time, right? So where AI is helping is, imagine I have orders from all these 1,000 customers. What's the best way I'm going to fulfill these customers? What's the best way I'm going to which DC I'm going to service it from? What products can I substitute it with? So that my customer is still happy. Because I may not, if I can't satisfy everybody, how am I fulfilling this thing so that all my customers I'm maximizing the happiness for all my customers. So there's a lot of work going on in the supply chain space, right? Where order fulfillment using AI, right? With respect to, knowing what to manufacture, where to ship, distribution to, DC to warehouse, cross shipment, so on and so forth, and substitution of products, all those things are helping, right? In terms of optimizing how do I basically meet my customers' SLA, right? So actually, there's a lot of interesting work that's going on in the corporate world in terms of how AI can help solve this problem, which usually a human being can't solve, because a human being gets emotional about one customer because he's only servicing that one customer.
Yeah.
So when you start taking a look at 1,000 customers and prioritize and start fulfilling these things, technology like AI will play a big role in that.
Yeah. I can see your point. Will AI help anonymize and aggregate data to support, broad use case? So usage. In other words, I'm not saying this is your data. I'm not saying this is my data. I'm saying this is data available to the ecosystem, who can then use it to make better decisions in their business. So it's that anonymization of data and pulling insights from that data.
Yeah. So, for example, I think the example you talked about earlier, Steve, let's revisit that. Imagine you are a producers council in South Africa who actually advise all the, orange, citrus growers in South Africa. If you knew what is the current inventory of citrus in UK and what is the rate of consumption of the citrus in UK.
Yeah.
Right? Because citrus comes from not just South Africa, it comes from Spain, comes from other places.
Exactly. Right? Yeah.
So if you knew, and how does that basically map historically, right? Then you can advise your producers, hey, there's actually excess inventory in UK compared to historical.
Yeah.
Delay you are picking by a week, because if you pick it, you're not going to get the orders, right? So again, you can start planning. I'm just giving a very high-level example, right? But because once you pick it, there's shelf life, right? You basically have a shelf life, right? So I think you can start thinking about how can you plan your picking activities, how can you plan all your activities so that you're not, either getting a very low price because there's too much supply, right? Or you have to dump your products in the market.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, Prasad. In seriousness, at that global level, inverted commas, it makes even more sense, obviously.
Yes.
And certainly when we were talking to the dot pass guys at LCL, they were painting a sort of little bit of a picture of that future, and so does Aggregate One. How would you sort of summarize what we said in terms of in context of your journey, and maybe say something about the next 5 years?
So I think the point to take away, I would say, Steve, is the amount of data that is available to people will continue to keep growing, right? It just continue to keep growing, public, private, what have you. It will continue to keep growing. Clearly supply chains, still any cross enterprise data sharing is, limited to a few companies, but that will keep evolving, right? Because I think that's kind of where the market will drive the companies to, provide. So I think it's fair to assume that the amount of data available for any corporation or a producer or what have you will keep growing over a period of time, right? And with that, there's an opportunity for people to use technology like AI or other similar technologies and transformation and things like that to use this data in planning their business and in making better decisions, right? So that your overall goals can be met, in a much more sustainable way, right? So I think sustainability will be a theme that will happen. That will be the underpinning of lots of investments over the next 10, 15, 20 years, right? So I think with this data, I think you can definitely help that goal, but at the same time, help your goal of making better decision making to improve your profits, right? End of the day, if you're running a business, you want to improve your profits, right? And this data will help you do that. No?
Can I just ask one more thing that we should have asked earlier because it's on the tip of everyone's tongue, of course. Any thoughts on
ChatGPT?
Yeah, no, stupid name. Any thoughts on that?
I think it's fantastic. I think ChatGPT is fantastic, and again, I see that as a natural evolution of technology, right? So it doesn't surprise. I'm amazed at how good it is, right? But at a higher level, I'm not surprised that it's actually doing what it is doing, right? Because I think everything we see in the market, I think technology evolving to a point where you can get these type of more such tools coming in the market. But it can actually really be used for in transforming your business as well. For example, we're actually talking to a customer about this, right? If you imagine you want to go do maintenance of a lift or an elevator or a motor. Today, so you have to basically be an expert to and if you're not an expert, you dial the guy who's expert. Hey, buddy, how do I, I'm seeing this, what do I do? Imagine, if you will, you're dialing an assistant, which is a ChatGPT bot, and is able to recite to you exactly what to do. That's actually quite interesting.
Yeah.
There's talks of, again, I don't know how things will flow eventually, but there are talks of, can ChatGPT take your initial diagnosis, kind of when you go to a hospital, can you take the initial, data and then direct you to the right doctor? Right? So why can't it, right? Because, again, some of these things I think will happen. If ChatGPT can actually pass the medical exam or law exam, right? I don't see why a tool like that, I'm not saying ChatGPT in itself, but tool like that, over the next, several years, can't do things that are more intelligent, right? To direct people towards the right places, no? And help, them solve the problems quicker.
And I think if I can give the produce example of that, Prasad, if I may, for a moment. Today, inspections, compliance, all those sorts of things are done on a fairly static basis, point in time. And it's done by inspectors wandering out there, looking at a farm, etc., and doing some tests. But I suppose in future, you can do real-time compliance and pull data from, as you say, satellite, everywhere else, and say, we have a risk factor around farms X, Y, and Z. We should suspend their global gap standing for 6 weeks while someone goes out, and we use ChatGPT to organize the factors that they need to look at, and then they will analyze the output that the inspector gives back to ChatGPT as an example, right? And that way you've got a more real-time and dynamic understanding of the health, if you like, and safety of the supply chain, using that in combination perhaps with other technologies like blockchain to disseminate the data.
Yeah, again, ChatGPT is just one example. I think it's important to not paint the entire world with ChatGPT. ChatGPT is solving a specific set of use cases, right? There'll be more such tools that will solve other similar problems, right? In the level of depth that ChatGPT is able to solve this use case, right? So I think that will happen, right? I think it's important to not expect ChatGPT to replace everything else you're doing, right? I think it will definitely replace the things it is meant to do for the use case is being developed for, right?
Yeah.
And then there'll be similar tools, whether OpenAI is doing, Microsoft is doing, or Google is doing, or somebody else is doing, similar tools that will basically replace similar functions, right? And or do those functions as good as ChatGPT is doing.
Okay, well, that's very good, Prasad. I think we've covered a good hour's worth of content, and well, thank you very much for your time and for your insights.
Yeah, thanks for for the time as well, Steve. So I know we've been trying to find this time for a long time. So I'm glad we're done.